Today we will discuss Introduction to Civil Procedure. Before anything else, just a disclaimer, the individual behind this YouTube channel is a law student. This is not an attempt to present himself as an expert in the field, but merely an effort to share his knowledge of civil procedure based on what he learns and understands in his study of law. This lecture is merely a supplement to your study of this subject. It does not seek to replace your reading materials or contradict what your professors have discussed with you. We cannot genuinely understand civil procedure without appreciating the very definition of remedial law. What is remedial law? So there are a lot of definitions, but for the purpose of this discussion, I will just put here the different definitions enshrined in the book of the known authors for this subject. So first we have Riano. Remedial law, as commonly understood, refers to the rules which provide for the system of protection of rights, prevention of the violation of such rights, and the means of redress for such violations. Such rules also provide the methods for the enforcement of obligations recognized by law and lay out the procedure by which suits are filed, tried, and decided upon by the courts of justice. Now, according to Rigera, remedial law is that branch of law which provides for the jurisdiction of courts and the rules concerning pleadings, practice, and procedure before the courts. Now, according to Tan, remedial law is that branch of law which prescribes the method of enforcing the rights or obtaining redress for their invasions. In simple words, remedial law is that branch of law that we use in order to enforce our rights. Of course, substantive law is far different from remedial law. When we say substantive law, it concerns our rights and obligations. But when we say remedial law, the question is not what is my right, but rather how do I enforce my right? If you have taken your persons and family relations already, you know that a minor can demand for support. Now that's a matter of substantive law, because such right is granted to a child under the civil code. But how do we get that support and hand it over to the child? That's a matter of remedial law. Because in the latter case, we are now talking about how do we enforce the rights of the child. If you want to have a picture in your mind, think of it as a mango. Okay, let's say mango is the substantive law. Now, how will you eat that mango? The process of picking it, the process of peeling it, the process of slicing it, the process of eating it, that's procedure. So at this point, you should already know why substantive law and remedial law are different. To my view, substantive law is much easier to understand because you are learning theories. Since college, as typical students, we are learning theories, di ba? But in remedial law, we will delve into the intricacies and technicalities of procedural law, even if we are not yet lawyers. That's why it's difficult. Ano bang malay natin sa jurisdiction? Ano bang malay natin sa appeal? Ano bang malay natin sa non-forum shopping? Di ba? So those are the things that make remedial law difficult. So I know it's difficult, but we just have to force ourselves. After all, studying law is our choice. So let's discuss first the rulemaking power of the Supreme Court. Under Article 8, Section 5 of the Constitution, the Supreme Court shall have the following powers: promulgate rules concerning the protection and enforcement of constitutional rights, pleading, practice, and procedure in all courts, the admission to the practice of law, the integrated bar, and legal assistance to the underprivileged. Such rules shall provide a simplified and inexpensive procedure for the speedy disposition of cases, shall be uniform for all courts of the same grade, and shall not diminish, increase, or modify substantive rights. rules of procedure of special courts and quasi-judicial bodies shall remain effective unless disapproved by the Supreme Court. So we have discussed this in one of our videos in statutory construction. So we already discussed that Congress cannot alter, repeal, or supplement rules concerning pleading, practice, and procedure. Why? Because that is the exclusive power of the Supreme Court. So we have several jurisprudence regarding this topic. In the case of Napes versus CA, the Supreme Court now has the sole prerogative to amend, repeal, or even establish new rules for a more simplified process and a speedy disposition of cases. Such power is now the exclusive domain, take note of that, exclusive domain of the Supreme Court. If the other branches of the government enact laws or issue orders that repeal, alter, or modify the procedural rules promulgated by the Supreme Court, these branches are deemed to have trespassed upon the rule-making power of the Supreme Court because, again, it is exclusive to the Supreme Court. That's in the case of Estepona Jr. versus Lobrigo. The authority of a court to issue injunctive writs is embodied in Rule 58 of the Rules of Court and is part of its inherent power to issue all auxiliary writs and other means necessary to carry its jurisdiction into effect under Rule 135, Section 6 of the Rules of Court. Let's briefly discuss this case of Fabian versus Desierto. In this case, a law that states that the decision or orders of the Ombudsman may be appealed to the Supreme Court by filing a petition for certiorari within 10 days from receipt of the written notice of the order, directive, or decisions or denial of the motion for reconsideration in accordance with Rule 45 of the Rules of Court is unconstitutional. Why? Because this has the effect of increasing the appellate jurisdiction of the court. This is also inconsistent with Rule 45, Section 1 of the Rules of Court, which only applies in judgments or final orders of the Court of Appeals, Sandigan Bayan, Court of Tax Appeals, and RTC. In Fabian versus Desierto, the court struck down a law that allowed the Ombudsman cases to be appealed directly to the Supreme Court via Rule 45. Why? Because that law attempted to increase the Supreme Court's appellate jurisdiction, which only the Supreme Court can do. The Cooperative Code cannot provide for the rules on summons and service of the processes which are contrary to those provided in the Rules of Court, since these are matters of procedure and cannot be replaced by the Cooperative Code. Now, in Cathay Metal Corporation, the court ruled that the Cooperative Code cannot create its own rules for summons that contradict the rules of court. Okay? Procedure is the Supreme Court's territory alone. So no law or either special or general law can contradict or trespass to the Supreme Court's exclusive authority. The Supreme Court, in connection with its power to promulgate rules of practice and procedure, also has the power to overturn judicial precedents on points of remedial law through the amendment of the Rules of Court. It can relax or suspend technical or procedural rules or exempt a case from their operation when the purpose of justice requires it. The Supreme Court may allow the exhaustive ventilation of the parties' arguments and positions despite technical or procedural flaws. It has the power to make exceptions to the rules of court. The power to suspend or even disregard rules can be so pervasive and compelling as to alter even that which the court itself had already declared to be final. While the rules are important, they are not actually straitjackets. So the Supreme Court still has the power to relax or suspend technical rules when the interest of justice requires it. However, wag kayong malilito. Sa puntong ito, gusto kong malaman nyo na ang general rule talaga is strict adherence to the rules of procedure. That's why if you ask lawyers, kahit sino pang tanungin nyo, civil procedure is very technical in actual practice. Why? Because you really have to comply with all the technicalities. Now, kailan ba nangyayari ang relaxation? If the court finds it necessary to achieve the purpose of justice. So keep that in mind. So it's not automatic that the rules of procedure will be construed liberally in favor of you. You cannot demand that. Say for example, in Enrile versus Sandigan Bayan, the court allowed bail because on because of humanitarian grounds like age, health, and the likes, even though the rules did not explicitly provide for such. But the Supreme Court did that. Why? Because according to the Supreme Court, it is because they have to uphold fundamental human rights. So those were some of the illustrative cases that you can read. So where do you look for remedial law? The primary sources of remedial law are the following. So you can just read this one by one. Batas Pambansa bilang 129 and other special laws which provide for the jurisdiction of the courts, the rules of court, your CODAL, decisions of the Supreme Court, circulars, resolutions, and other administrative issuances of the Supreme Court, the Constitution, particularly Article 8 of the Constitution on the judiciary. When it comes to rules on prospectivity and retroactivity, we discuss a lot of this in our statutory construction lectures, so I hope you watch them. Rules of procedure may be made applicable to actions pending and undetermined at the time of their passage. They are retroactive only in this sense. The general rule is that statutes are prospective. Okay? However, procedural rules are retroactive in the sense that they apply to all pending actions. In Napes versus Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court applied to pending actions which standardized the period for appeal by allowing a fresh period of 15 days within which to file the notice of appeal with the RTC, counted from the receipt of the order dismissing a motion for a new trial or of motion for reconsideration. I also invite your attention to the case of Napes versus Court of Appeals. This is a landmark case, and this was also, I assume, introduced to you as early as criminal procedure, correct? So, in this case, the court applied this fresh period rule even if the case is already pending. So, in other words, you cannot actually contend that the new rule of procedure does not apply to you because your case has not yet reached its final determination. So long as your case is pending at the time of the passage of the new rule, then the new rule can be applied to you. So, like in every rule, there are certain exceptions. What first is the general rule? As a general rule, the rules shall govern cases brought after they take effect and also to pending cases. So, what are the exceptions? Let's find out in the next slide. So, what are the exceptions? When procedural rules do not apply to pending actions. This is according to the case of Tan versus Court of Appeals. The rule does not apply when, where the statute itself or by necessary implication provides that pending actions are exempted from its operation. So, of course, when the rule itself expressly provides that it does not apply to pending actions, the courts are not allowed to apply the rules in pending actions. Simple as that. Kasi sinabi na ng rules eh. How about when the law does not expressly state? Pwede pa rin. Kung, okay, it can be necessarily implied from its language. So I suggest you watch our discussion in statutory construction because we talked a lot about verbal lehis and doctrine of necessary implication. Second, if applying the rule to pending proceedings would impair vested rights. We discussed in our statutory construction lecture also that, as a general rule, when we talk about remedial laws, no vested rights may arise or attach. Remember? That's why remedial laws are allowed to be given retroactive effect. Pero ang problema kasi, what if may vested rights na nag-attach or arise doon sa old rule? And that vested rights may be impaired if we apply the new rule. Aba, hindi pwede yan. In that case, the old rule will be followed. When to do so would not be feasible or would work injustice. If applying the new rule would make the proceedings absurd, or if it would be unfair to a party who acted in good faith under the old rules, the court will not apply the new rule. It will apply the old procedure. Why? Let's say a case has been going on for 10 years and is already at the final stage. Let's say a new rule suddenly requires you to start the trial all over again under a different format. In that case, it's clearly not feasible. It's also unfair to the parties who spent a decade of litigating. Isang dekada na yan, tapos uulitin natin. Do you think that's feasible? Let's always go back to the basic principle in remedial law. Okay? Procedure is meant to facilitate justice, not to obstruct it. And lastly, if doing so would involve intricate problems of due process or impair the independence of the courts. I guess you learned already that due process is a constitutional right. Hindi ka pwedeng parusahan kapag hindi ka naririnig sa korte, kapag hindi naririnig ng korte ang side mo. So if a new rule makes it impossible for a person to be heard, then the court will apply the old rule, not the new rule. Let's go to the topic of liberal construction. Under Rule 1, Section 6 of the Rules of Court, these rules shall be liberally construed in order to promote their objective of securing a just, speedy, and inexpensive disposition of every action and proceeding. Courts should not be unduly strict on procedural lapses that do not really impair the proper administration of justice. As much as possible, litigations must be decided on the merits. The higher objective of procedural rules is to ensure that substantive rights of the parties are protected. After all, ang gusto lang talaga ng mga korte, manalo o matalo ka based on evidence, based on merits, hindi dahil sa lapse o pagkakamali sa procedure. Remember that the higher objective is to protect substantive rights. So, we look at the rights of the people involved. If the error is minor and doesn't hurt the other party's chance to defend themselves, then the court will usually let it slide. Procedural rules are not to frustrate the ends of substantial justice, but are tools to expedite the resolution of cases on the merits. See, we look at the rights of the people involved. So, as I previously said, the general rule is to really follow the rules. Don't make the mistake of thinking that these rules are optional. They are not. But again, if the rule, if the error is too minor and it doesn't hurt the other party's chance to defend themselves, then the court will actually let that slide. Remember that. Rules of procedure are mere tools designed to facilitate the attainment of justice. A strict and rigid application that tends to frustrate rather than promote substantial justice must be avoided. So, as cited in the case of the Manila Banking Corporation versus BCDA, the court held that we should avoid a blind adherence to the rules. If it means a party loses their day in court for a reason that has nothing to do with the truth of the case. Let's talk about the general rule on compliance with procedural rules. as well as the exception. As a general rule, zealous observance of the rules to guarantee the orderly, just, and speedy disposition of cases. That's according to the case of Melendres versus Gutierrez. Ang general rule natin is zealous observance. Ibig sabihin, you are expected to follow the rules of court. Hindi pwede na yan. Why? Because the rules provide the roadmap for an orderly trial. Without them, magkakagulo sa court. That's why I mentioned earlier that these are actually too technical in real practice according to one of my professors. In fact, sabi ng professor ko, ang civil procedure daw ang pinaka-technical. So if the law says you have 15 days to file an answer, you file it in 15 days. You do not wait for the 20th day and just hope for liberal construction. You cannot do that. The court expects you to be diligent. That's why zealous observance is the general rule. What is the exception? The exception is liberal construction. We only resort to liberal construction in exceptional cases where a rigid application would result in manifest injustice. Take note of that. There should be an effort on the part of the party invoking liberality to explain his failure to abide by the rules. Hindi pwedeng sorry lang sa court. Hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na nakalimutan natin yung nakalagay sa rules. You cannot do that. You have to at least provide a valid and reasonable explanation kung bakit hindi ka sumunod sa rules. For example, for 2-7, nagkaroon ng lindol, nasira yung law firm mo. Di ba? In that case, it may be considered by the court. The court needs to see that you did not ignore the rules out of laziness or disrespect. If you cannot explain the lapse, then don't expect the court to relax the rules. The party must be able to handle that heavy burden of proving that they deserve an exceptional treatment. Take note of the words heavy burden. The law assumes the rules to be followed. So, if you want an exception, you have to discharge this burden. I-prove mo sa court na deserving ka mabigyan ng exceptional treatment. To have an exceptional treatment is not a right. It's only a privilege. So, you must show that if the rules are not relaxed, a substantive right will be lost or a great injustice will occur. Now, we move to one of the most important topics in remedial law, that is jurisdiction. Before ka pumunta sa korte para mag-file ng kaso, kailangan mo munang itanong, may jurisdiction ba itong korteng ito para pakinggan ang kaso ko? Because if you file the case in the wrong court, your case is dead on arrival. So let's define what is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the power and authority of the court to hear, try, and decide a case. It is also defined as the power and authority to declare the law, to expound or to apply the laws, to hear and determine issues of judgment on the issues before the court, power to inquire into the facts, to apply the law, and to pronounce the judgment. In simple terms, jurisdiction is the legality of the court to act on a matter. Hindi porket court yan, hindi porket RTC or MTC yan, pwede na nilang pakinggan ang lahat ng kaso. They cannot do that because jurisdiction is a grant of power from the law. You'll also talk later on about the concept that jurisdiction is actually conferred by law. So if a court acts without jurisdiction, its decision is like a scrap of paper, walang bisa. So, in other words, jurisdiction cannot be based also on the agreement of the parties. Kahit pa mag-agree si Juan at si Pedro na i-file ang kaso sa MTC, kahit dapat sa RTC i-file, that cannot be done because the MTC does not have jurisdiction on that case. So let's talk about jurisdiction over the subject matter of civil action. How is this determined? It is determined based on the allegations in the complaint as well as the character of the relief sought. So, let's say if I file a complaint alleging that you owe me 3 million, what is the nature of the case? The nature of the case is a collection of a sum of money. Based on that amount, which is 3 million, the relief sought, okay, the law determines if it belongs to the MTC or the RTC. Now, under Republic Act 11576, since this amount, okay, the 3 million exceeds 2 million, it belongs to the RTC. Now, here's the question. What if you filed an answer saying that you don't owe me 3 million? Rather, you are saying that you only owe me 2 million. Okay, 2 million, sarado. Will that case be transferred to the MTC because it is 2 million? It does not exceed 2 million? Hindi. Because jurisdiction is determined based on the allegations in the complaint. Ano nga yung allegations ko sa complaint? You owe me 3 million, not 2 million sarado. Okay? Real actions, personal actions, or actions incapable of pecuniary estimation are to be considered as subject matters. So these are the categories of cases. You can have that in mind that you can call these categories of cases. So when you say real actions, it involves title to or possession of real property or any interest therein. When you say personal actions, they are usually about contracts or damages. Now, when you say incapable of pecuniary estimation, it means hindi pera ang pinag-uusapan, kundi yung mismong karapatan. Like for example, action for quieting of title. Okay? Here, you are not actually concerned about the money. You are concerned about the cloud in the title. So it is incapable of pecuniary estimation. It is important that a court or tribunal should first determine whether or not it has jurisdiction over the subject matter presented before it, considering that any act that it performs without jurisdiction shall be null and void, okay, and without any binding legal effect. So this is what I mentioned earlier, like it is like a scrap of paper. Because if a court decides a case without subject matter jurisdiction, the decision is void. It is the duty of the court to dismiss an action whenever it appears that the court has no jurisdiction over the subject matter. So, in this case, the court does not need to wait for a motion from the party. Okay? Once it realizes that, oy, hindi ko pala jurisdiction ito, they are legally bound to dismiss the case. Albeit the question of jurisdiction over the subject matter was not raised by either parties, the courts will have to first address such question before delving into the procedural and substantive issues of the case. They can act on it at any stage of the proceedings. So take note of that. They can act on it at any stage of the proceedings, even during appeal. Take note. You can actually raise lack of jurisdiction over the subject matter for the first time, even during appeal to the Supreme Court. Okay? As a general rule, it's never too late to point out that the court has no jurisdiction. That's why sometimes when we read cases, sometimes the Supreme Court remands the case to the lower courts to proceed with the trial proper. Kasi minsan, umaabot yung kaso sa Supreme Court kahit walang jurisdiction yung lower court that originally tried the case. So allow me to flash this in the screen. Don't worry, these are just codal provisions, and I will share my PowerPoint with you. Now, what is the effect of lack of jurisdiction over the subject matter? A court devoid of jurisdiction over the case cannot make a decision in favor of either party. Where a lack of jurisdiction over the subject matter appears on the face of the record, an appellate court may, in motu proprio, dismiss the action. Where the court itself clearly has no jurisdiction over the subject matter or the nature of the action, the invocation of this defense may be done at any time. So, if the court has no jurisdiction, hands off dapat siya, okay? It cannot rule for the plaintiff, it cannot rule for the defendant. More importantly, even if the parties don't notice it, the appellate court, like the CA or the Supreme Court, can dismiss the case in motu proprio, meaning on its own initiative once they see the record. So, unlike other defenses like litis pendentia, res judicata, and the likes, which must be raised early, the defense of lack of subject matter jurisdiction does not expire. Okay? It is not subject to estoppel as a general rule. Let's also discuss payment of fees as a jurisdictional requirement. It is not simply the filing of the complaint or appropriate initiatory pleading, but the payment of the prescribed docket fee that vests a trial court with jurisdiction over the subject matter or nature of the action. Where the filing of the initiatory pleading is not accompanied by payment of the docket fee, the court may allow payment of the fee within a reasonable time, but in no case beyond the applicable prescriptive or reglementary period. The same rule applies to permissive counterclaims, third-party claims, and similar pleadings, which shall not be considered filed until and unless the filing fee prescribed therefor is paid. Ang filing fee ay jurisdictional. Okay, take note of that. Meaning, kung nag-file ka ng complaint pero hindi mo binayaran ang fees, that court cannot take cognizance of the case. However, the Supreme Court is actually lenient here. If you didn't pay the full amount immediately, the court can allow you to pay within a reasonable time basta hindi lalampas sa prescriptive period ng action. Where the trial court acquires jurisdiction over a claim by filing of the appropriate pleading and payment of the prescribed filing fee, but subsequently the judgment awards a claim not specified in the pleading, or if specified, the same has been left for the determination by the court, the additional filing fee, therefore, shall constitute a lien on the judgment. Minsan, during trial, biglang lumaki ang damages na napatunayan mo, and the judge awards you more than what you originally asked for. Since hindi mo naman nabayaran ang fees para sa excess, okay? Tumaas eh. So nagkaroon ng excess. So hindi mo naman nabayaran yung excess na yun, the law says that the unpaid fees will become a lien on the judgment. Ibig sabihin, ibabawas yun sa makukuha mong pera bago mo makuha ang panalo mo. Let's also discuss jurisdiction over the person of the parties, also called as jurisdiction in personam. Jurisdiction over the parties is the power of the court to make decisions that are binding on persons. Probably you've heard already of jurisdiction in personam, especially when reading full text of the cases. So, it is the court's jurisdiction on the parties. If the court has this jurisdiction, its decision is binding on you personally. If not, then the court's decision is not binding on you. Simple as that. So let's have an example. Imagine the RTC of Manila renders a judgment ordering a person in Davao to pay a debt. If that person was never properly brought into the case, for example, he was never served with summons, that person can simply ignore the order because the court never acquired jurisdiction over him. In other words, there is no jurisdiction in personam. That's why summons, when it comes to civil procedure, is extremely important. It is the legal power of the court to render personal judgment against a party to an action or pleading. It is the authority to say, ikaw, Mr. Juan de la Cruz, you are liable. Because personal judgments create an obligation that follows the person. Again, like I said, without this power, any judgment of the court is useless and unenforceable. It is an element of due process that is essential in all actions, civil or criminal, except in actions in rem or quasi in rem. This is the most important part, due process. You cannot be condemned or lose your property without being given your day in court. Are you familiar with the maxim odi alteram partem? In English, it means listen to the other side. No one can be condemned unheard. Acquisition of jurisdiction over your person is the way the law tells you, hey, you are being sued. Come and defend yourself. So, for example, if a judge decides against you without you knowing that there was a case filed, let's say walang summons, walang notice, wala. That is a violation of due process. That judgment is void because jurisdiction over your person or jurisdiction in personam was never acquired. But take note of the exception. Actions in rem, like for example, land registration, quasi in rem, like for example, foreclosure. The court's power comes from the property itself. So the rules for jurisdiction in personam are less strict. So how jurisdiction over the persons of the parties is acquired? The answer is it depends whether a party is a plaintiff or a defendant. If it is the plaintiff, jurisdiction is acquired by mere filing of the complaint. When it comes to defendant, it is acquired by his voluntary appearance in court and his submission to its authority. So we've talked about jurisdiction in personam. Now let's discuss jurisdiction over the issues. How is this conferred and determined? Based on the allegations in the pleadings of the parties. Di ba we mentioned earlier, it is always based on the allegations in the complaints or pleadings. Kung ano ang sinabi ng plaintiff sa complaint, doon titingnan ng court kung ano ba talaga ang pinag-aawayan. Kung ano sinabi sa pleadings, doon titingnan ng court kung ano ba ang nature ng case. Ano ba ang gusto ni plaintiff na mangyari. Okay? If it's not in the pleadings, generally, it's not an issue that the court can decide. It may also be determined and conferred by stipulation of the parties as when, in the pretrial, the parties enter into stipulation of facts and documents or enter into an agreement simplifying the issues of the case. So, if you have taken your criminal procedure already, you're familiar with the pretrial, di ba? This is actually one of the most important part of the trial. Dito maglalabasan ng baraha. For example, aaminin mo ba, Pedro, na mag-asawa kayo ni Maria? Aaminin mo ba, Pedro, kung may anak kayo ni Maria? Something like that. Here, lawyers will agree to stipulate or admit to certain facts. Why? So that we don't waste time proving them. That's the very purpose of pretrial. An issue arises because a material allegation of a claiming party is specifically denied. Take note of that. Specifically denied by the defending party. The denial, to be specific, must conform to any of the denials prescribed in Rule 8, Section 10. An issue is a disputed point or question to which the parties to an action have narrowed down their several allegations and upon which they are desirous of obtaining a decision. Kasi simulat sa pool, kung walang nagdi-disagree, wala na tayong dapat pag-usapan pa. Correct? Wala nang issue. Now, we talked about disagreement. In other words, if Juan says yes, Pedro says no. So what if, for example, Pedro wants to prove that Juan is wrong? How will he do that? He denies it specifically under Rule 8, Section 10. In other words, Pedro cannot just say, I deny everything. You cannot do that. Pedro needs to point out specifically what part of Juan's claim is wrong. So later on in this subject, we will talk more about this. Where an answer fails to tender an issue or otherwise admits the material allegations of the adverse party's pleading, a judgment on the pleadings may be rendered by the court upon a motion properly filed. So, this is the shortcut to, let's say, shortcut to justice. Okay? Because if the defendant files an answer but basically admits everything or fails to raise a real defense, meaning walang issue, walang issue na na-tender doon sa defense, the plaintiff can ask the judge to decide the case immediately. So in this case, there is no need anymore for a full-blown trial because there's nothing left to argue about. Tapos na ang laban eh. So for this as well, we will talk more about this in the future. Now, this is also an important topic. When an issue arises, even if not raised in the pleadings, you can also read Section 5, Rule 10 of the Rules of Court as amended. This occurs when the parties try an issue with their consent. Under Rule 10, Section 5 of the Rules of Court, when issues not raised in the pleadings are tried with express or implied consent of the parties, they shall be treated in all respects as if they had been raised in the pleadings. No amendment of the pleadings is necessary. So, as a general rule kasi, you cannot raise new issues unless those issues were raised in the pleadings. Now, what are the exceptions? If during the trial, a new issue is introduced, halimbawa, a new defense, and then, hindi nag-object ang kabilang panig. So, that's what we call implied consent. The law treats that as if it was part of the original complaint or answer. Because hindi nag-object eh. In that case, no need for amendment of the pleadings. Halimbawa, you did not state in your answer that your debt is already prescribed. But during the trial, you interposed that defense. As a general rule, that's not allowed. Pero what if the other party did not object? So that's implied consent. Let's discuss jurisdiction over the res. Res means thing or object, everything that may form an object of rights. How is this acquired? Jurisdiction over the res is acquired either, so I invite your attention to the case of Biaco versus Philippine Countryside Rural Bank. So, by the seizure of the property under legal process whereby it is brought into the actual custody of the law. Kapag kinuha na ng korte ang control sa property, let's say through attachment, the property now is in the hands of the court, otherwise known as custodia legis. So, since it is under the custody of the law, the court now has the power to decide its fate. Let's say in a foreclosure case, if the court issues a writ to attach the property, that property is now under the court's jurisdiction. Regardless, kahit nasaan pa ang owner ng property na yan, the court can now proceed because it already holds the house. Second, as a result of the institution of legal proceedings in which the power of the court is recognized and made effective. Nonetheless, summons must be served upon the defendant not for the purpose of vesting the court with jurisdiction, but merely for satisfying the due process requirements. The second way is simply by filing the case itself, especially in actions in rem. So when you file a case that asks the court to determine the status of a property or a person, the law automatically recognizes the court's power over that rest as part of the proceeding. So, let's say in a land registration case. In that case, you are not suing a specific person. You are only asking the court to declare to the whole world that you own the land. By filing that petition, you are bringing the land under the court's jurisdiction for that specific purpose. To wrap up our discussion on the various types of actions, we have this comparative table summarizing action in rem, action in personam, and action quasi in rem. While this requires lengthy discussion, I will just give you a bird's eye view so that you will have an idea vis-a-vis these topics as we proceed with our discussion in our next videos. So let's discuss action in rem. In an action in rem, the court is talking to the whole world. Hindi tayo nakikipag-away sa isang specific na tao lang. We are asking the court to settle the legal status of the thing forever. Since it is directed against the thing itself, the judgment binds everyone, whether they participated in the trial or not. Ano bang example ng action in rem? For example, application for original registration of a parcel of land. Ano pa ba? Escheat proceedings, petition for declaration of insolvency, petition for change of name under Rule 103 of the Rules of Court. Now, let's go to action in personam. Ito naman ang pinaka-common. The plaintiff is suing a specific defendant to demand a specific act or let's say payment for a loan or damages. In these cases, pagdating sa action in personam, the judgment is private. It only affects the parties involved in the case. So, if you are not party to the suit, generally, the judgment cannot be enforced against you. Ano bang malay mo sa kaso ni Juan at Pedro? Silang dalawa lang nag-aaway. Now, let's go to action quasi in rem. Ito, medyo hybrid, okay? Because it is brought against a specific person, like an action in personam, but the goal is to satisfy a claim using a specific property, like action in rem. So here, the court does not necessarily need personal jurisdiction over the defendant if it has jurisdiction over the property. But take note, the judgment is only binding between the parties, okay? Not the whole world. So, ano bang example ng action quasi in rem? Let's say judicial foreclosure of mortgage, action for partition and accounting. Ano pa ba? Action to quiet title that can also be considered quasi in rem because in that case you want to remove cloud over the title. So that's considered quasi in rem. So that will be all. Thank you for listening. May your love for the law remain strong as always. Maraming salamat po.